start, and we'll do the intros. Hello, I'm Betsy Cunningham. Welcome to Southern Oregon Progressive Podcast. And this show is dedicated to Let the Sunshine In. And everybody know what that reference is to. I mean, it has a meaning, but Let the Sunshine In depends on how old you are. All
I
right.
just hear that one verse, "Let the sun," and that's all I.
All right. But because I think it was Hair, right? that was in the play Hair, and a very popular song at one point. But the Sunshine is about Sunshine Week, and one of the things about doing an SOPP show that I wanted to do it for is to help, I guess, bring civics education to the populace, because I think it's part of the problem we are in, the shit show we are in, is that so many are ignorant of really how government works, and more importantly, the rights they have to be involved in it. So anyway, that's a long introduction for me. Kevin, you want to introduce yourself, and then John and Zach and whoever else wants to jump in.
Hey everybody, it's Kevin here, co-host of SOPP. Thanks for coming out, and along with we all know the principles of free government, but I'm really interested to learn a little bit more about Sunshine Week. I tried googling it before the meeting, and it kind of didn't really pop too much up besides just some other nonprofits and stuff. So I'm excited to learn about it, and thank you for hosting this, Betsy, and thanks for everybody for coming out.
Okay, I'll go next. Hey, I'm John Hunter with Community Rights Douglas County and with the Oregon Community Rights Network.
I can go. I'm Frances Etherington, and I have been with the Community Rights and John at these meetings. And I just got back from the Public Interest Environmental Law Conference, and wow, what a weekend.
Yeah.
I'm Zach. I'm a graduate student in the history department at University of Oregon. I'm affiliated with the Institute for Social Ecology in Vermont, friend of community rights, and always happy to be on SOPP.
Anybody else want to introduce themselves?
Hi, good evening. My name is Lori Wick, and thank you so much for hosting this evening. And I also am running for Douglas County Commissioner.
Thank you.
Hey, how's it
Yes.
going? I'll go as well.
Go.
Let me jump on. Sorry, so everyone can see me. Maybe. Hey, how's it going? Nick Mitchell, running for County Commissioner as well, position 1. Yeah, happy to always be here.
Anybody else want to introduce themselves? Thanks, Nick. All right. So if you want to jump in or you want to ask a question, please feel free to do so while I'm talking. One of the things I have done, public meetings and records, it's one of the things that interested me when I lived somewhere else. Being aware of the extent of the fight around public records and meetings that have happened since the founding of the current national government we're under. And this week, this is the start of Sunshine Week, which has been around for a few decades now, spearheaded by journalists, because they're the ones who are really the ones who help ensure that what happens in government isn't behind closed doors. And we have, it's a constant fight, and there are organizations who rate states regarding their public meetings and records. Well, I think that Oregon got a B because there are still some things that they don't provide, but have been pretty good. And from my own experience, besides doing public presentations, how I got involved in this happened to be work as a paralegal when I lived in another state, and doing poverty law and government benefits law. And the reality is that most of those programs and most things that impact our lives that we don't even think about our government, some way government is involved. And, part of that advocacy, kind of goes from the administrative individual advocacies to the systemic advocacy, and then how to get information to know what laws we're dealing with, right? Who's running this program, who funds it, and all those kinds of things that government does that then, when you're in litigation, you get access to that when you actually sue someone. If somebody in a government's benefit program, because of the statutes that they have regarding public benefits from a federal level, such as housing, Medicaid, Medicare, those kinds of things, they have due process rights. So there's some access and rights for people in programs, but FOIA, which is the federal, what is the Freedom of Information Act, which is a federal law, and then Oregon's public meetings and records laws that actually allow the general public to have access to this. And a lot of this was over, fights that were had to, people struggling to ensure that they were able to do that. And I know that we've had discussions, particularly around the county commission race, about meetings. So, the issue is public records, but also public meetings. So Sunshine Law is really about access to records, and really started over this battle with the federal, the Freedom Information Act, but has evolved into recognizing all these places and trying to ensure that all government, particularly at the decision-making level, is transparent, and most decisions are done behind, not behind closed doors. So the Freedom of Information Act does, it's a general access to information. And I don't know if anybody has had any experience with the Freedom of Information Act, but and if you're doing stuff like in forestry, right, you certainly, environmental issues are going to be heavily impacted. In the advocacy I've done around poverty law, they originate at a federal level, but all the mistakes and the things you're looking for tend to be at a state or a more localized level. And so the Oregon public meetings law and records law is where I have most experience with working full hand and becoming pretty proficient in them. We used to have an organization called Open Oregon, and I don't know if anybody, remembers who that was. That was actually started up in the Portland, Oregon area by journalists initially from the Oregonian, and some of the fights that they have had. And so this organization, I think it still has some form of existence, but not what it used to be. But like 20 years ago, I brought them here a couple of times to talk about public meetings and records law. And we had forums at the libraries to do that. And then I've done a few other, and then I just found one that I did, I think 5 years ago, that I did online in Douglas County, that a whole lot has not changed, but there are some important changes. And with the Oregon public meetings and records law, my experience with FOIA, when I have done it, which I worked in the vocational rehabilitation system as an advocate, and a lot, you may know that a lot of the funding, the state may run the program, or a division of the state may, but oftentimes there's heavy ties to the government, particularly regarding funding of these programs. So the government-run vocational rehabilitation for people with disabilities is funded at a federal level, and there's a whole lot of heavy regulations from the federal side. HUD, when you're looking at the local housing authority, there's not a direct, even though the whole local housing authorities are public entities under Oregon law and under federal law. When it originated, HUD only allowed public housing. They did allow nonprofits for a while, but it was heavily public, and now the regulations require them to be public entities. And so they are a special district, if you will, but they're not even clearly identified as that. The Housing Authority of Douglas County is as a public entity under state law, and so they're covered by the state law. But if you have a complaint about HUD, our local housing authority, you go to the federal HUD. And so I've dealt with, in those two capacities, dealt with some FOIA requests I got to tell you, my own personal experience, a hell of a lot easier to get shit from the state of Oregon. Okay. That's just my personal, and at some level, once I had gotten the information I needed for whatever I was doing, I didn't bother to continue sometimes FOIA requests. I had one that it took years before I ever got a straight answer, but luckily I didn't need it. But for most things under the Oregon Public Records Law, most things that are records are records under the um, public records law in Oregon, and I think the statute is 192. And under the description, when this is posted, I'll have a list of all this stuff that tells you where the statute are. There's also a manual that the Attorney General in Oregon produces. And it's pretty comprehensive. It's not just giving the statute or administrative rules that may be used in the public records or meetings law, but it also gives case analysis and points, and it kind of, gives a little bit more detailed um, instructions. If we've talked about the meetings issue and people being upset, the county commissioners don't let them speak, but we don't have a right to speak at a public meeting unless the public meeting is a hearing that has a legal due process hearing requirement attached to it in the state of Oregon as a rule. So if it's a land use change or zoning change, there's certain things that certainly do require public comment, but in the context of the Douglas County Commissioners not allowing general public comment, that is not something that is in the statute, and it would have to be. And the public body meeting is to meet to do the business of the county. It's not really meant to be a public forum. And so that's why they can do what they want. Now, things like a charter, if you change the Douglas County charter, that could probably be changed, even though the state law wouldn't necessarily require it. The charter under a charter change might be able to provide that there is general comment sections, right? That's written that they have to have them, or they have to have meetings in various places throughout the county. But that stuff then becomes having to change that through a voter vote. That would have to be changed to do that. Public records law, there are exemptions, and there's a list of exemptions in the state law. There's a list of exemptions in the manual that the Attorney General puts out as online. And but there can be exceptions when they say this has an exemption. The entity that is saying there's an exemption has to not just cite the statute, but give you some data as to why that particular thing you're requesting is subject to the exemption in the statute. So sometimes it would be like things that are in executive session, if there's litigation. And I'll tell you, more recently, I requested some documents. It was last year, probably 6 months ago. I lost track of when, but it was for certain public records regarding the evaluation of the city manager of the city of Roseburg. And so what they did was not necessarily an exemption for an employee work records, because they can say it's employee records, personnel files, and confidential information. They're not technically confidential, but you can say there can be exemptions for that. So there's a public good is the test. Does the public good outweigh, or the public's right to know outweigh that particular exemption? And so what they cited to me is litigation, that they didn't want to release the record because of the concern about pending litigation, which, because it's out in the public, it was a threat by Elk Island and Bernie Woodard to suing the city and the city manager over the allegation that he believes the city manager particularly interfered with his ability to buy a piece of property, and the Cow Creek swooped in and got it, instead of he. And so they didn't want to give it to me. I thought about appealing it, because you can appeal a denial of public records unless they're with the public official, like a county commissioner, to the district attorney, the local district attorney. So if it's a state entity, you appeal to the attorney general in the state. So if it's a state agency, you would appeal. But if it's any local jurisdiction, city or county, or if it's a special district, when I first started doing advocacy years ago at the Housing Authority, I actually did have to go to the district attorney and ask the district attorney to make them give me some records. Now they're really good at giving public records. So the good thing about having to have that struggle is that sometimes it'll fix for a long time. I did joke the executive director left, who was in there when this happened. She recently left, and I joked with her. I said I was dreading the day that you would retire or die, because then there's a whole set of people that might have to be, go through the same thing again. Hopefully that won't happen. But so if the DA does not give you the records or doesn't side with you, then you have to then pursue it in court. And meeting violations, if there's a public meeting, and this is a thing that is happening. I don't know if people are aware of it, but there was a House bill that just got passed and is on the way to the governor's. Let me pull it up. I was looking at it earlier. And it's House Bill 4177. And what this wants to do is change, or actually will change if the governor doesn't veto it. It will actually change the way that the public meetings have been interpreted for ever since I have been here, that I recognize. So right now, the conundrum that our Douglas County commissioners have gotten themselves in, and I've actually pursued a complaint with them, with the different county commissioners, and it was probably about 20 years ago now, that they can't meet if they have a quorum and they're meeting to discuss county business that they may have to deliberate and make a decision about. They can't meet together. So in Douglas County, because we only have 3 commissioners, that rule would apply if 2 of them got together. And so when I got involved with it, there was a problem of them writing what they called routing slips that were memos, like just a little memo, and something would be before them. And one county commissioner would say, okay, on the little routing slip, okay. Or they would say, vote for this person or a person's name if they were going to appoint a committee. And I was involved in actually the HADCO committee, and who sits on that, and said, well, hey, this doesn't look like it meets the public meetings law, because you're actually meeting that routing slip is circumventing the public meetings law. So they did change that practice after we had some discussions, but I don't know if they, went back to doing that. I would suspect that if they're not being watched, they would do that. So does anybody have any specific questions or want to make comments?
Yes, what will House Bill 4177, what does that change in the
it's going to allow them to meet without having public meetings if it is a information gathering session. And frankly, I was not even paying attention to that, because I was paying attention to the delay of the campaign finance reform, because it is something that people have, worked on for a long time. And then I was just reading some updates and saw that. I do want to give kudos to Virgil Osborne for actually voting against it, for them to do this. And there were, so this passed with a good number of people. And I just saw that Zach pulled up the whole list. Did you pull up the bill itself? And so it gives you the yays and nays, and you're looking for the 3rd reading in the House and the 3rd reading in the Senate, because that's what, the passage is. So the journalists, the Oregonian and others right now are trying to get the word out. They did an editorial that I think it was the Oregonian editorial that, got my attention, which was, basically contact the governor and say, don't sign it, that, uh, to try to stop it. Because even people understood their objections, but they went ahead and voted for it. And I do agree that there is kind of a conundrum with counties who have only 3 elected officials. But I'll tell you, this problem that they're trying to address does not happen in the state level. Okay. Because they're not going to reach anywhere near a quorum with only 2 of their 3 of them meeting together. Right. So this only happens when the quorum is there because there's a physical quorum of the governing body. So they want to exempt the information gathering part of it from the law, and they concede that, oh, it may need to be changed, but do it anyway. And I'm not really clear who they're doing it for, honestly. Yeah, Lori.
Does that routing slip process work for the agenda, creating the agenda, whether they decide what's going on the agenda or not as well? Because that's what they say their process is now on how to decide that.
Well, that is a good question, and I did not deal with it as far as any agenda item. And I also have to, think about, never paid much attention. My assumption was, at one point it was the chair who basically made the agenda and other people contacted them for information, and that was never challenged as an objection to it. If they do something different, like have a dialogue, I would be very suspicious. So what the routing slips would say, like I caught it because there were, even though HADCO, or the Housing Authority, is its own public entity, there is a quirk in the law that they're not elected. They're appointed by the Douglas County Commissioners. So there's a state law so they're not elected, they're appointed, but everything else the county commission can't do much about. They don't give them any money, right? They don't have the power of the purse. They can't even, it's not even clear whether they could remove them from office, right? The best they could do is not reappoint somebody they didn't like what they were doing, and that was part of what the struggle was about. But that was where they clearly put somebody's name. So there was several prospects, who they were looking at. There was applications. And so they put the name, I want this, signifying this is who I want, which actually was not just a deliberation behind closed doors. It was actually a vote. Right. Because then they clearly know that. I would think that they're smart not to still not have gone back to that. But hey, I don't know.
Well, but they're doing that now anyway. I mean, anytime they have any openings for any of these for any of these committees, like they take applications, and then you go to the commissioners meeting and they announce who which candidate that they have chosen. They don't have any public discussion about it.
That is suspicious. But if you can't catch them, that's a challenge, right? How do you catch them? They're not going to tell you, well, I talked to Tim about this beforehand. Somebody could file a challenge um, on the public meetings, having a violation of the public meetings with the agenda. I'm not sure how far that would go. And this is part of the conundrum the Douglas County Commissioners have argued before the folks that were there with me is, well, these are administrative tasks, right? That there are certain things. And if we had a county administrator, there would be no question about it, because it would not be our elected county officials in a quorum needing to make a decision about this kind of stuff. They could, the county administrator would most likely, like with an executive director, work with the chair, right, to establish what, is on the agenda. And they then become the facilitator of what is on the agenda, the paid staff person. wouldn't violate quorum rules because it's not the elected officials that are doing it. So there is a fix that needs to be made at some level, honestly, because even in the city of Roseburg, over this problem with the city manager's performance and efforts by some city councilors to want to discuss whether she should remain the city manager, there was a big brouhaha, and the city paid some, tens of thousands of dollars for, someone to determine whether somebody did anything wrong. And we actually have 8, so you'd have to have 5, connection. But then the other aspect people may know about is it came about 15, 20 years ago. There was a court case up in Lane County that basically said when you talk one to each other and they then share the same information, that's a serial communication equivalent to a public meeting. And so that has been on the books. And then that became codified in the law, the serial communication. It was already case law for years and years that have been having to be followed because you could be sued if you did anything other than what the case law said. But they then put it in the statute. But then this kind of that codification, I'm guessing, just made cities and people like counties like ours that only have 3. Because I think where was a county that we had, that had the fight over the public access to information, and they only had 3 county commissioners, right? Lincoln County. Right.
Yeah, Lincoln.
So it would be in those counties where they only had, where the problem is if just 2 of you talk. And so when you're the administrator for a while, the county, and you might have been going, John, to those meetings. I went once or twice when they were holding their administrative meetings on Monday. So they're trying to divide our administrative persona with our elected persona. And they're not doing those anymore, are they?
No, they stopped those a long time ago.
Yeah, that lasted a couple of years. And so they would make those administrative decisions. The fix again is a county charter change. It really, the fix for something like that is to, for us to have a professional administrator, and then they are the ones that do that kind of work, and it's a clear avoidance of violation of any law. And the problem is they're trying to fix it with something that's actually going to make it harder for us to know what they are doing. Right? We don't know what they're doing now to some degree, because if you don't catch them, I mean, keep in mind that what I caught was I literally saw the routing slip that had their names on it, okaying somebody's application before the meeting. So, that wasn't hard for me to do something about. But if they had just talked to each other in the hall, right? We might, people might not ever know. And then it makes me wonder, do they avoid even saying hi in the hall? I don't know.
But also what they do is, they, like on these committees, they announce who they selected. But if you want to know who all applied, you have to file for a request for information and pay too. So it's like, the whole process is, there's no transparency, in the entire process. If you want to know who was there, you have to pay to find out who applied.
And that's
public. So go ahead, Kevin.
Well, and that's what I've heard about it is the most compelling issue because, we have, besides the sketchy laws that are just now being passed, it's always the price scale because they always, depending on, isn't it scaled up besides how much you do and how much research they have to actually dig in? I've never done it, but I've heard that's, it's on based on a scale. So it could go anywhere.
Yes. And they have, but some of them, like the city of Roseburg, has given me public records requests for nothing, right? They're not things that are, really long. And I tend to try to be very concise. For one, I don't want my tax dollars being spent, them having to look up public records just to mess with them. I can mess with them in better ways, less costly to the general taxpayer. So I wouldn't do that, but that was one of the rationales for the cost, right? And we also keep in mind this law was passed when we didn't have everything on the internet like we do today. So I think that there's really a good argument that those records should be free. They should be hosted somewhere, as the records are compiled. They can determine right away whether they meet confidentiality or, can be redacted or not given relatively easy in this modern world. God forbid, but they could have AI sort them out and have a human check AI. I mean, really, they could, it could program, and that's probably, maybe an easier way to even program it. So there's very little excuse to have this argument for cost. There is a benefit, it's a benefit of being poor, and I'm poor enough that I have the right to ask for a waiver of those things. And the other key thing that you ask for if you want them to waive any fee is that you say that you're using this to make people in the community aware of the information. Because if it's just you because you have a pissing contest with the county or the city, then they're not supposed to question your motive, but it might sway the argument of giving it to you for free, particularly if you did have to ask, because you can also go to the DA if those things are not granted. And the same thing, you have a right to go to court. And you do have a right to go to court to get a public meetings violation theoretically. But if they held something in executive session that should not have been subject to executive session, you can go to the Oregon Ethics Commission. That's where you would make that complaint. So anybody else have something? Want to know something that I know?
Yeah,
All right.
Betsy, let's talk about electronics, how electronic record keeping has entered the scene, and the issues of of manipulating, a recording that so it doesn't properly reflect the record, but yet it is accepted in court.
If the record, so who is the determiner of the proper record? Is that what you're asking? Because it is often the record, if you're talking about minutes of a meeting, right? That's one of the aspect of it. So if those minutes reflect that something that the body passes, then that challenge to that would be harder, right? To make.
Have statutes made electronic recordings legal documents with regards to finding of fact, etc.?
As far as I know, if they're a recording of the hearing or a legal meeting, and then can be easily translated into a written transcript, that can be done now at a touch of a button. But the intricacies of challenging the record, I am not an expert on that by any shape or form. So do you have an example of the context? Say a record of the Douglas County Commissioners, or?
No, it's just in general history. It seems like previous statutes, bylaws, whatever, said that documents had to be in writing and in print form. And at some point back, I don't know, I suppose in the 1970s, maybe 80s, did legislatures and councils, et cetera, have to change their requirement to allow electronic recordings, electronic record?
I know in litigation, depositions for one, or documented oral, and they used to be with a court reporter machine, and then became recorded, voice recorded. And in order for that to be entered into a record in litigation, the last time I was involved, that was though over 10 years ago, that was, it was usually the transcript of a deposition. And for one, it would be, it's easier to manage that way because you're not going to, you might admit the whole thing, but usually quotations or references would be just a portion of a deposition because depositions can take hours. So if there's a hearing, whatever that recording is, and these days, the same as in courtrooms, that the last I was aware in the Douglas County Circuit Court, that they have been audio recorded forever. They have not used court reporters, but they're transcribed by folks who are certified to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? And now that you piqued my interest, Larry, I'll have to go find out. I'll post it on the Facebook page or send you a message. So if nobody wants to know anything more about the public meetings or records, I would strongly suggest, and this is going to be out there, if you can, please, send an email to Kotek and ask her to veto that House bill, because it really is a step backwards and it's really it's very annoying to me. And I think that it's kind of like a big misstep, like the campaign finance reform. I just don't talk to many people who support the idea that it's too burdensome from the public to be engaged in government if they want to be. Has anybody else heard that? People say, oh no, we need to not let them stick their nose in. Let them do what they want. They may act like they will let them do what they want. All right. So how does this fit in with the principles of free government? I'll let Zach and John answer that question. I think to me, just the easy connection to me I made is, that this has to be, critical in any kind of government structure we have, right? Being able to know what the people who are making decisions on our behalf or in our name are doing and why and how they're doing it.
Okay. Do you want to go first, Zach? Or?
Let me just speak on it. Well, I think it's important to note that in our principles of free government, we don't have any mention of transparency. Because the problem of transparency comes down to oftentimes individual willingness of a statesman to provide information. So this bill that's going through the state legislature and is ending up on the governor's desk, yes, it's worrisome that it uh, could allow for what would be called closed door meetings, secret conversations. But let's not pretend as though those don't already happen. It's common practice in statecraft uh, at virtually any level.
Oh, you're a cynic, Zach.
I don't want to come across as cynical here. Just that as much as it's a valuable fight to press back in ways that are available through the existing institutions. Um, for example, it's difficult to press for, say, public comment when you don't already have a forum to give public comment. Those forums have to be created in order for those gains to be made possible. So that's why in our statement on the principles of free government, one of the key points is that right to assembly, which specifically has to do with forming these kinds of forums. I could just read it. The right to assembly by which the people can organize free popular assemblies and practice local democratic self-governance. The thing about an assembly like these is that decision makers are not autonomous, independent from these forums. These forums, these assemblies are decision-making bodies. And so by virtue of being in the assembly, participating in these assemblies, transparency is built in because you can see your neighbor who is also making a decision. You can see yourself who is making a decision. Uh, there's no representative who has unique powers that no individuals or groups of individuals among the general public don't have. So at the same time as this is to get beyond the seeming cynicism, at the same time as it's important to fight a battle for a reform within the existing order of things, to press to protect access to meetings of politicians, to public opinions in a town meeting or a commission meeting, to try to prevent closed doors discussions by politicians. It's never going to be adequate. There's always going to be room for, within those systems, there's always still going to be room for those kinds of closed door dealings to occur. There's always going to be a loophole. We can close as many loopholes as we can and make it more difficult, but ultimately, we're going to need more than that. And when we're dealing with governments that are foundationally not built for freedom, not built for public participation, not built for we might call it civic engagement or the practice of citizenship, we need something else. And ultimately, I think the promise for something else presently is in the developing People's Homeless Commission in Roseburg as a starting point. John, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just start by, if you're not familiar with what we're talking about, we have this little brochure here. I'll show you that Zach wrote. If you see me sometimes and you want a copy, let me know. Or if you're in town, you can go, believe it, you can actually go to the Umpqua Watershed's office when they're open, and they have copies of it up there. So that's one of the places that you can get it. A couple things. There's 5 universal community rights for a just existence, and I think Zach mentioned one. Kind of the first 2 are the right to establish a government to secure community well-being, and 2, the right to assemble and to practice self-government. Governance. If you can do those 2 things, and that's also going to make, that's going to make transparency, even more available. So, excuse me. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, the principles of free government. If we can enact them, then naturally it's they're going to result in more transparency, because you're going to be dealing, you know, you know, with your neighbors in the decision making process, and not some elected official whose job and well-being and financial security is dependent upon who who gives him the most donations to keep him, getting reelected. So, yeah, that is the key thing, is to, the more power that the communities have, then the more transparency you have, and it's getting more and more out of hand every day. And even in the initiative process, you see that with the campaign financing law that was passed by the people by a large amount, and it hasn't been enacted yet. And in fact, they just made some changes on it in the recent legislation. So we had to get back to the power, of the communities, and that's the best way to really get any transparency back. And also on the county level, like with term limits, I mean, that passed in Douglas County by a very large majority, but because it got contested in court, well, it lost. So that's, I mean, the whole initiative process now is so weak and has been corrupted, basically, that it's really hard to, even on that level, to, for the will of the people to really get on, or, to be heard. So that's a couple of my takes on it. So
I'll add to that too. I'll put my historian hat on.
okay.
So this is a long-standing fundamental problem. The closed door meeting. It is the foundation of the United States as we know it. The idea of there being a will of the people that catalyzed or developed what we know as the United States. Say on the top of the Constitution, of course, there are the big words that say "we the people." We should always ask, who are the people? Who's the we that these documents are actually referring to? In 1787, this is when the Constitution was drafted and beginning to be ratified. It was done so behind closed doors. There was no public input. Much of the population did not even know that this was happening. And the process of ratification was pressed through strongly against much popular demand. There were some states that even held out for a while because it was such a suspiciously drafted document. Rhode Island, in particular, held out for a while, but was forced to eventually cave. And there's of course the reigning myth that we get in our schools, in uh, news media, in film and television, that this document, the foundation of the United States as we know it, or the federation that we know as the United States, there's a myth that this is representative of the people, so to speak. The reigning now consensus among American historians is that this is better understood as a coup. In fact, there's a very well-known book that makes this argument that's called The Framers' Coup. And it's not a new view either. As early as the 1910s, there were arguments being put forward that, yeah, the Constitution was written and signed behind closed doors, and it was done for the benefit of a very limited class of society. And it, of course, makes sense considering that the so-called founding fathers were largely of the professional, merchant, and financial and planter classes that held serious economic power and political power over the population. And a lot of them were being planters and others also slave owners. So considering this, any present discussion that we're having about concerns about meetings being behind closed doors is one of the earliest American problems that those before us, almost 250 years ago, also grappled with and even rebelled against at certain times. It's a fundamental question, and it would behoove us to consider it again, not as something that can just be reformed away. Even though reforms are necessary, they are not sufficient for actually democratizing the United States. And that should ultimately be our goal. Not just transparency, but active participation afforded to every single person in this country. It's more than transparency, participation and agency and democratic political power.
I too am a cynic, Zach. Um, so and also, my love of the U.S. history is that period, Shays Rebellion and all of that stuff. That history gives people a wake up call if they actually want to, explore not even just you know college textbooks, but original writings, right? That's historical record exists because you're absolutely right. It was the elite, right? Who, and the idea that people think they know better. I've been in the legal profession, and that's what those people are made of, right? That they think that they know better. Therefore, they even don't avail, allow common people to even know the law anymore, right? You have to, have formal education, to do it. And quite frankly, I'm going to tell you, I've been very heavily involved in the law in various aspects in my life. It's not brain surgery, okay? I mean, I'm sorry, but most of the stuff can be learned, that it shouldn't be a mystery. But the reform efforts, the pushback is really that poke in the eye. I agree that, we need significant change. The fact that they could have a 2 or 3 hour meeting, which frankly, coming from Long Beach, California, sometimes city council meetings, which was a much bigger deal than county commissioners here. I mean, what they controlled, the money they controlled, the people that were, in their jurisdiction, they could have hours long meetings, right? So the idea that our county commissioners, that's part of the problem. They could actually have more transparency just naturally within their existing systems, and they do have the power to make, general public comment because they're the ones who gave it to begin with. But I think that in Lincoln County, the concern I had, I thought it was just that our assholes that did it. But when the people from Lincoln County came and talked to us about their battle, they were having, I think discussions of, the chair wanting to not have any general public discussion there because they didn't need to do it. Would interrupt with, business. It wasn't necessary for that to happen. And so, and some reference that they were talking about it on a, probably at the Oregon Association of Counties, right? And these professional associations that our taxpayer dollars pay for, by the way, for our elected officials to belong to who do lobbying, you know. Um, but this idea of training board members so that gets infested in that arena, then all these other county commissioners, well, why do we have it? We don't really need it. They can get information other ways, because I think that I don't know, as lawyer, somebody was mentioning that, they say, well, you can come talk to the county, commissioners individually. But I think a good point that was made somewhere else, that but then everybody else doesn't know. And I have said this before, that's the reason I went to county commission meetings when I used to go there. I did not want to talk to them individually about an issue. I wanted that tape recorder going. I wanted anybody who wanted to go see it, because 20 years ago they had cameras and it was up on public access television here. I mean, there was a way to get it. It's been a way to get those recordings. So I think that, that is how they should be. I don't want to meet with them individually. Maybe if I don't even know why I would want to meet with them individually for the most part. Lori has her hand up.
Yeah, I put in a question. I just want to make sure it's a kind of in your flow too of your conversation, but it kind of goes back to what John was speaking about in the term limits, getting contested in court and the people's will. Why was that not implemented? What was it, lawless or illegal or?
It may have been because we don't have a county charter. That was one of the arguments. And it was the county clerk, Patty Hitt, I mentioned her before, who's no longer there, that, was trying to deny Susan Morgan the right to file for reelection. And she started the complaint, if I remember correctly. But then she decided not to run, and the county was not going to support her attorney's fees. So there was a battle about that, and eventually I think there was a ruling. John, is that right? Because you were, I'm sure, following that stuff at the time.
Yeah, I think, yeah. And so they got a judge, they got the judge they wanted, and he ruled against the initiative. And kind of based upon too the fact that we don't have a home rule, a charter, so therefore we don't really have the legal right to have term limits. And it probably could have been appealed, but yeah, of course, it was this basically one guy really pushed the whole initiative thing and got it. And of course, he couldn't get up the money. He couldn't come up with the money for an appeal, which is becoming a problem now on a lot of these initiative things. There's one going on in Lane County that right now, their watersheds initiative. And my understanding is that if it passes, it's going to go to court. And it sounds like they don't have the money to fight it in court, to back it up in court. So that's another issue right there. Is the money issue. So even if you fight to get this passed, they can go to court, and you have to back it up in court, which requires an awful lot of money.
So if the charter was in place before, so once the vote happened and the people wanted term limits in the county, then the deal should have been the home charter over anything. That should have been the next step then, or first?
It should have been first. The argument was that because we don't have a home rule charter. So there's two structures of government. Home rule gives us more authority to make structural decisions. And one is more an administrative arm theory of the state government, and that's what we are without a home rule charter. So the argument was that we did not have the legal authority as a county, even with a citizens initiative, which is what it was that passed. And it had a good majority of votes passed too, like the campaign finance. So there were a lot of people who voted to the limit them. And keep in mind, wasn't this around the time that Doug Robertson was there, and he was like the longest existing county commissioner in the state?
Yeah,
We
yeah.
had him. And so people were just, this is crazy. You spend half your career, as a county commissioner and the taxpayers' expense, shilling for the timber companies. So there was a lot of dissatisfaction about local that at that time. So that was if I'm remembering correctly, that was one of the main things that I noticed about the decision was the home rule charter. Well, then that's what we have to do. So if we want to make significant changes in county government, it has to be, the change in the charter. And it has to be like, it would really be wise to take time and look at it. And I think I mentioned this somewhere else, and get more people involved in it, and get people who are angry down at the table. Okay, what do you want change? Well, this is how we change it. And it would have, and you could have the local campaign finance reform. Think
Well,
of what
and
happened, in Lori's, election. Tom Kress, has what, $150,000 over the last few years in campaign finance. That we could limit that with a home rule charter, but we can't limit that with probably the same thing would happen. If there's an initiative petition without changing the charter, it would probably come to the same fate.
well, and like a lot of what Douglas County has voted on has been, like we voted for campaign finance reform with a over 60% margin. I think it was like 58 or 68% campaign finance reform
It was
passed in Douglas.
68. It was
And
68.
people would love that kind of, well, what did Trump say? He has a mandate. People would love that kind of mandate, 68% of the vote. And a lot of what we've been bringing up along the last couple of episodes kind of seems like Douglas County needs, you know what I mean? Some structural change along those lines.
Yeah. Maybe that
And
could
if
be
the
the next focus. Maybe we could do
Right.
some organizing around that.
I think we should. And talking about the community rights and those community assemblies, that would be I'm working on the People's Homeless Commission because it's an opportunity right now because of what's happening in Roseburg. But that would be a great thing to do. A People's Assembly about would be a charter, and it would be much more likely to pass, and I think that even whether I don't think this is a left and right issue. I think it's like the campaign finance reform. I think it really is a populist issue that no matter whether you're on the right or the left, there's some things we fundamentally agree are wrong, right? It's just, how do we get to the meeting of the minds and then get people out to vote? Because that was the other challenge I think the charter had, wasn't it, in a non-general election?
Right. It was
Um,
it was 2017. It was an off year.
So it was a special district election, which would have been in May, and that has historically the lowest turnout. They somehow thought that might have been,
No,
you usually, those kind
it
of
was in
things, you
November.
strategically determine that. It was in November?
Yeah, it was in November.
No, it was in May.
No, it was in November. So,
Well, they could have had a special one, but the special district elections are actually in May. There's no
no,
November election in odd number years. There can be.
yeah.
Um,
Well,
um,
but we didn't even start getting signatures until about June. So, so I mean, we could have put it off till May, I guess, but but we didn't want to. So.
Well, and I think it's just starting that discussion again because, frankly, I mean, whatever we bring up, it is, there's fundamental challenges in this county that we all address in our own specific ways, regardless. But whether it's a people's commission or it's more access to public access or anything like that, the charter is what I'm hearing for the last, say, even 3 episodes. It's been brought up that there's no fundamental change without changing the structure that we go on right now. Because until that happens, it's always going to be contested in court. And frankly, we're on the losing side. So we're poor. And so we can't fight that thing out. We only can win in elections. We can't fight their dirty games.
Well, if we could replace the county commissioners, that could make some change. But some of the things that you might want to systemically change, it would need a charter. Like you want campaign finance reform. I think Lori's example, the race that Lori and Nick are in, is a prime example of why we need to do it at a county level if the state's going to delay it until 31, right? I mean, I'm assuming the governor is going to sign that bill.
I'm assuming she's going to sign that bill too. And, you're entirely right, because there's a lot of, rule changes that can be put in place specifically about campaign finance reform at the local level. You can only spend, there's so much that could be done. I don't want to name off just a few because there's so much, you know what I mean? Like they can only spend $5,000. You can only do this. You can only accept this. There's so much that a county charter could really do for the progression of campaign finance reform. I know that's kind of my cudgel at the moment, so I'll speak of that. But I mean, it impacts so much other areas too, because like there's not public input for some of these other committees that go through when they're selling parks, or they make these recommendations for, increasing the commissioner's salary or shit like that. But those are things that could actually happen. That could be put in stone.
You're absolutely right. It could limit chart. Yeah, go ahead, John.
I would just like to be kind of a curmudgeon about the whole thing. I like to point out too that, Kevin, that like with the charter, we would have had 5 different commissioners from 5 different districts, which sounds good, but in Douglas County, you would probably have 5 Republicans in office instead of 3. And when you think about it, because I
disagree with that statement, because I mean there might be some problems with geographical districts, but it's a lot more direct democracy. And we're saying that when you actually look at the numbers for elections in Douglas County, one, Elkton is the only place with more Democrats than Republicans, and there's only a couple of more. Last time I was on Ballotpedia was about 19 when they actually gave you this data, 2019. But Reedsport only has a couple hundred less Republicans than Democrats. I mean, more Republicans than Democrats. But so there's a lot of promise out on the coast, because the coast is a forward. Up until COVID, it was the only place in Douglas County that was consistently seeing above 5% growth rate.
Yes, but in 2017 they voted against it about the same rate as about the same ratio as everybody else in the county did too, which was very, very disappointing. The other thing is that the unfortunate thing is, because I know this from Cassup County, you can get somebody in one of the districts that, and probably a good example would be Todd Vaughn, would be a very likely candidate to get elected from South County, and you're kind of stuck with him, because I know in Clatsop County, that's what we base our initiative on. And I actually talked to people up there that were active with it. And my brother lives up there, and they were all excited about it. About a couple years after we, our vote here for the, for the home rule charter, I'm talking to my brother, and one of the districts up there elected this really right-wing nutcase, a woman that was just basically bringing the whole county government, to a standstill. And my brother, lo and behold, says, "Well, we can't vote her out because she's from this one district." So that's another little issue right there, that you kind of like, it's one of the consequences. So
You're right, and there is it's always a double-edged sword, especially with
Yeah.
democracy. You know what I mean? Because you're right, people would love geographical districts, but at the same time, it's not encompassing of the whole county. But also at the same time, that's why I'm also a strong advocate for term limits and honestly a county administrator, because frankly, we could cut the job of every county commissioner and get a good administrator.
Yeah, I mean, they could they would have time to represent their district. That's what they're supposed to be doing. So, yeah, I mean, that is the big plus. And right after we had the home rule charter, after it got voted out, I mean, the commissioner's whole argument was that, well, we're all a county manager. We don't need one. Right after the vote was taken, the next thing you know, on all their cards, they all got county manager written on their cards. So they kind of just conveniently went along with see, we are managers. So,
Lori, your hand's up.
Yes, so could we do a home rule charter where we would have a county manager and very similar to the city council, then basically the board oversight would be done by volunteers.
Yeah. Yeah, you basically got to have you got to have a county manager with the home rule. So that
would be a good focus then. Like there's only 3 commissioners, and so you wouldn't need like a whole lot of volunteers to do it. And if you had a county manager, and then it would be free, and then you're not affected by special interest money at that point.
Well, county managers they aren't immune to financial pressures and lobbyists either. I mean,
yeah, but then you got the board oversight for that though, and it's happening in front of public.
Well, one of the interesting things of that Lincoln County was there was these other counties got a lot of crazy stuff going on. Their commissioners there is like Lincoln County has a county manager too, but they don't have they don't have a home rule charter either, which is interesting that they have a city manager, and there was behind scenes stuff going on with him too. And also they had department heads there that had a lot more power than it seems that the commissioners did. I mean, like department heads would kind of talk to the city, to the county manager, and kind of be making deals together. So there's a lot of intrigue either way.
Well, and it sounds like there at least needs to be a discussion on it, because at the very least, I think, it might not be next week, so I'm not sure what Betsy's thinking, but at least we should get a group together to talk about this stuff online, because, there are some things that we could focus on, because right now, none of us like the county structure of the government. And there are things that we can at least hammer down on with a big community audience, because I think this is a conversation that needs to be had.
Yeah. And
with just with the home rule charter, there's certain jurisdictions you don't have, which would be the campaign finance, right? It just makes it clear that they have the legal authority to do that if there's a campaign, if there's a charter change. But a city doesn't have to have a home rule charter to have a manager elected official form of government, like a city or county manager, in council or commission. They don't have to have home rule charter to do that. It's just also if we wanted to have local campaign finance limits, that would be clearer that the county had the legal jurisdiction to do that if they had a home rule charter. they wouldn't have to just follow whatever the state law said in regard to those things. So there's a kind of nuanced difference between, what you can have with a home rule charter and what you can't.
And I know Lori was talking about, well, you can put the money, the commissioners are being paid towards the county manager. And yes, I know in Lane County, because I read this a year ago or a couple years ago. I mean, they are a home rule charter, and they have a county manager that gets paid an awful lot of money. I know the city of Eugene just hired a city manager there, and they get over 300,000. Probably the county manager gets that much. Plus, Lane County has 5 commissioners, and they all get a salary too. And what I heard a couple of years ago, they all gave themselves a pay raise, and they're all getting over 100,000 a year. So,
well, something like that, the pay raise and the county commissioners could actually be limited in, like the state law limits the governor's salary. It's the state legislature.
yeah,
It's an Oregon revised statute. So that is something that could be done, is to say that, until it's raised by the people, they would have to be set at a certain limit. That could be done.
yeah, obviously it would have to be done because they obviously don't have that in Lane County.
Well,
I mean,
No,
what you're saying,
city manager would want it.
and you've got a good point, like there for the pillars that are specifically addressed for bringing up a community charter issue, you have to kind of, it sounds like, be super specific about them, or sometimes they'll just be abused because you're right. They hired the county administrator, but then they didn't address that the county commissioners can still address their own, bring up their own pay cycle. And I think there needs to be those caveats in there that are specifically layered out, like, no, it can't be addressed without a public vote on general election or something like that, where the majority of votes actually come out, or something along those lines. There could be like a whole different array that could be laid out, and it needs to be specific. So I see what you're saying, John, and I agree.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, you can have a vote to change to make changes on the charter. That's kind of part of the that's one of the advantages of a home rule. And Josephine County, they have a home rule charter, and I think they leave the state in the amount of changes that they have made on their charter. They've changed something like 20 times or so. Of course, they're a little wacko down there too, because they're always
more than we are.
Yeah, well, at least they make changes there, and they get and they recall their commissioners. So so they're doing something that we don't do. So
maybe we need to be as crazy as they.
Yes.
They do have some interesting stuff going on down in Jackson County.
Yes.
Or Josephine County. It's Josephine County, right? So anything else?
Larry left you a chat in the chat.
Yes. He asked whether the Oregon counties and cities operate under different sets of statutes. Yes. And for reference, I'll put them up there on the description in the YouTube as well, and put them on the Facebook page at SOPP. Yes. And there's also I joked about the taxpayer paid for association. There's a cities association and a counties association. And although I have conundrums about taxpayers paying for lobbyists that perpetuates bad local policies, I do think they're a great resource to explain what the jurisdiction of a city or a county is. And so I'll also put a link to their associations, and they have some training videos and some good resource materials. And then there's the Oregon Blue Book. If people don't know about it, if you go to the Secretary of State, and I'll put a link to that, it gives a lot of data about how city and county structures are, and even some of the differences when they list like different counties around the state. I think we have 36 counties. Anything else?
Yeah, I sent the information to Lori the other day. This Wednesday, the commissioners are having a hearing upon they want to readdress their R20 zoning changes. Rural open spaces, some fiasco that they've been working on for over 10 years. It's been to the land use appeal board a couple times, and it was remanded back, and they're going to have a hearing where they're going to now go back to live with the changes they made. And this is a real crazy thing. There's absolutely no sense in them for doing it. I think that they want to, ever since the Oregon land use laws passed, there's been, that element that has been fighting to get them changed. And I think our commissioners decide that they want to lead the way in the state to get our land use laws changed. And they seem to be determined that that's what they're going to do. And this RT20 would establish 20-acre parcels of land in kind of agricultural woodland areas that they claim are not productive of enough soil for farms or for forests. And actually, in reality, there are probably a lot of oak woodland stuff, which is a whole different ecosystem in itself. And they want to get 20-acre parcels put in these places so people can have little 4-H farms there. Well, that's kind of a joke, because the people are gonna be buying 20-acre parcels have the money that they're really not really interested in 4-H farms. It'll be a boon to developers, and there's many issues involved. I got a thing here that by the land use, the Department of Land Conservation and Development, when they fought this thing back in 2017, it's 16 pages of what's wrong with this thing, and it's also in violation of state land use laws. So anyway, they're going to have another hearing about this on Wednesday, and I hope to go. Lori says she's going to go, and she's been sharing it with the other candidates, and it's gotten some play on Facebook, which I was glad to see. So people are becoming more aware of it, and it's good for the commissioner candidates to know about it, to really see how our commissioners have been determined to waste their money on something that, if it happens, is not going to really solve any housing problems in Douglas County at all. It's just going to make it easier for their developer buddies to make more money. And the other thing is that if it did become law, then there's going to be nothing stopping that from then to reducing these sizes of the lots down to 5 acres. So and the land conservation groups in the state have been fighting it, and they'll continue to fight it. And it'll end up in court again, and the county will be spending even more money, in the courts to fight for this to fight for this proposal. So anyway, it's going to happen on Wednesday. Anybody interested? If they can't come, they can at least watch it on, they can watch the video.
And this is one of those legal hearings. Okay, so this is actually one of what I talked about in regard to, when you have a right to be heard. And so, these can actually even be more time than they might, allow for just regular agenda items, because there is, you have to make a reasonable effort to ensure that they actually do take, and it's called testimony. So it actually is the legal record of testimony of this due process, land use plan. That's what it is. The, periodic land use plan.
Yeah. One of the things I'm going to try to talk about is the wildfire issue. They've on this thing I was showing you. They got a lot of documentation about it. How our commissioners, they're so well. We had to cut our forests, and to manage them to reduce fire. And yet, what they're advocating here is to putting homes in very vulnerable fire land, issues, and they're actually creating greater fire risk by doing this. And these also will be in places that aren't in fire districts either, and they may not be able to get into fire districts. So they have no way of protecting themselves from wildland fires. So there's a lot of issues involved here.
I have a feeling that it might be for cattle ranchers too, because there's some special interest donors that have that in their business.
Well, last time there were some cattle ranchers that I remember were opposed to it. So it'll be interesting to see, because they don't want people, around their land there, because they're raising cattle there. They don't want to, they don't want to have any neighbors around, So, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
Is this land use proposal for houses to go on the land as well?
Yeah. You can put a house on it, on these 20-acre parcels.
But one house, or one house and accessory dwelling unit.
Yeah, but there's no guarantee that there's any water on that land either. And so it's sure they can, a developer can sell these lots, but somebody's, they aren't in any water district. They might not even be in a fire district. And they got to get roads into them and everything else. So you got to have some money to even get involved with the thing. Anyway,
is it being sold as being developable land for affordable housing?
No.
And is it being argued that that's what it will do?
No, they're just saying like for 4-H families and that.
So people want to have little family farm operations for their kids.
Yeah, that's how they are trying to, that's how they're trying to sell it. But at the same time, their argument is, well, we'll break this ranch land up because it's not really productive for ranch and farming use. But then they turn around and they're advertising it as used for family farms. So they're kind of they've been contradicting themselves the whole way. And then on this information sheet that I've been reading from, they raise questions too about the criteria that the Douglas County Planning Commission used to determine that these lands were low, production land. So there's a lot of issues involved.
Well, I just looked at the website, for the county commission, and I don't see an agenda up there, at least one that I could readily access in a few minutes.
Well,
Um,
it was in the paper. They have it advertised, and that it's a hearing. And I know that Shelley from Douglas Friends of Douglas County was notified, and she's preparing a challenge. So everything I've heard is that it's gonna happen, but I guess we should check again on Monday or Tuesday to make sure too.
yeah, no, it says that there's a meeting on Wednesday, but when I went to the agenda, it only had the agenda from the last meeting there. And
Okay,
unfortunately, yeah, and it's something I didn't mention when I was talking about meetings. The problem was that the notice of meetings, there's a legal requirement, you'll see in the link in the materials on this, when it's posted, that there's, a notice requirement. So meetings have to be publicly noticed. One of the big gaps that I've always believed existed is that sometimes, they don't give you anything but 24 hours notice, and they could. It's one of these things where they actually could give you, days and days notice, but they choose not to. It's a little harder for people to stay engaged with what's going on.
anyway, that's unless Francis wanted to talk about the Pill conference in Eugene.
Well, I think the most interesting thing that I was party to was a discussion of the Cow Creek and the Coquel tribal lands getting Roseburg BLM lands. Roseburg BLM has gifted these tribals lands, pretty important pieces of land. And the tribes have immediately clear cut those lands. It's a fairly, and now you all know where the Coos Bay Wagon Road lands are, north of Highway 42, west of Roseburg. It's a gravel road, very high recreation use area. And now that's the next parcel of lands that the state of Oregon is going to turn over to the tribes. Or no, actually, I'm sorry, it's Roseburg BLM that's going to turn over. It's actually Coos Bay BLM that wants to turn it over to the tribes. So there's a lot of discussion on not doing that because, for one thing, the Coos Bay Wagon Road lands has the highest density of spotted owls in the state. And when the tribe gets it, they just annihilate it. So anyway, that was one of the more interesting discussions I had. And there was just a lot going on. There's a lot of different panels. And so, yeah, it was very interesting. It's just in Eugene, and it's an annual conference. Very interesting.
And it's the Environmental Law Conference up at the U of O.
Yes, Public Interest Environmental Law Conference, otherwise known as PILC.
I've gone there a few times, and the the forums and everything like that. The speakers are really interesting.
Yeah, they have panels. And they might have like 10 panels in 1 2-hour period, and you have to choose which panel you want to go to. And then there's panels all day long. Every 3 hours, there's a new panel. So there's a lot to choose from. So anyway, yeah, I just thought one of the more interesting discussions that was the turnover of Roseburg BLM lands to the tribes, and these are important ecological BLM lands. And people are trying to stop, comparing the two that's already happened, people are trying to really stop the third one because it is the Coos Bay Wagon Road lands. And that's just, it's just west of where I live. I only live about 10 miles away from that place, and it's high recreation area. There's a East Fork Coquille River. There's a lot of fishing and swimming. And there's those caves over there west of Roseburg too. So there's some talk about how do we stop it, or do the tribes really deserve it? Maybe the tribes do deserve it, but they do just clear cut it, and that's true with the Cow Creek tribe, was given a lot of BLM land up by Red Top Pond near Myrtle Creek there. Gone. It's gone. And the Cow Creek tribe also got some stuff west of I-5, west of Canyonville. Immediately, it's just gone very quickly. And some of those lands was that one in particular was a BLM timber sale that we all protested, and we won the protest, and then they gave it to the tribe, and the tribe clear cut it. So big old growth native forests that we're talking about. So anyway.
So what can be done about it?
I don't know what can be done. There wasn't a conclusion reached other than people shrugging their shoulders. We don't know what we can do. I mean, there is not a notice out yet for a public writing campaign to Roseburg BLM to not do this. Or it's actually to Coos Bay BLM to not do this. And so I don't know. I think Oregon Wild might be coming out with that campaign. And I'll be certain to let you all know.
Yeah, maybe we should do a show about it when we have some idea of what we can do about it.
And I have a lot of pictures from all these places. I've gone there and looked around and taken a lot of pictures, and they're on my Flickr page. Maybe I could put the address if I have time, put the address in the comment section.
Well, I think we can agree that the Cow Creek Indians have been colonized.
Yeah. Let me see here. Okay. Share. Copy. And so here is the area that is the next area to be given to the Coquille tribe. Proposal right there in the Coos Bay Wagon Road lands. And here is, I don't have too many before pictures here, but this is the area up by Red Top Pond that was given to the Cow Creek tribe and its fate.
So how long did it take them to cut it down? This is dated it's line in the 2016.
Yeah. These transfers happened a while ago. These were not real current transfers. The one over on the first one, there was a big protest there. And we just simply lost it all. Here is this is the stuff across I-5 from Canyonville. And this is before they logged it. And we never got up there to take after pictures because they put a gate up, which is another thing. They put gates up, and it's no longer available for public access like the BLM land was. So, yeah.
And so when you say, is it part of one of these mutual management agreements? Or did they outright give it to them?
They outright gave it to the tribe. Now, the tribe does have a piece of paper that says, oh, we'll treat it really nicely, but they never say we won't clear cut it. And Val Hoyle is trying to engineer this latest transfer. For what I hear from, information comes from Eric Fernandez from Oregon Wild. And I'll get together with Eric and see if we can't develop some kind of a writing letter campaign about this latest one.
Yeah, people, there might be more people, a lot of people interested in it, particularly in, the accountability of, any government, including tribal government.
Right.
Because, it's everyone's environment.
I know it is.
So that's an interesting conundrum. It's a lot easier to rail at the government, the white government.
Yeah, right.
Um,
And it's not like the Coquel, it's not like the uh Cow Creek tribe needs money. They're the richest tribe in Oregon with their gambling casino, So I mean, when I tell people about this, they go, "Oh, but the tribes need money." No, they don't. At least not the
some tribes do, but yeah, I would assume it's not many of ours, particularly the ones with these casinos. When you look
Yes.
at the issue nationwide, that's what it seems to be. The economic development of casinos have benefited a lot of tribes in a good way, but a lot they don't have them. They live in poverty, some of the worst poverty in America.
Yes, that's true. Now, one of the other big discussions at the conference is the BLM has put out a notice that they've been directed by the Trump administration to increase their timber harvest. And so Roseburg BLM has put out a scoping notice that they're going to have a new environmental impact statement soon, where they're going to do away with their areas of critical environmental concern, ACECs, or at least the areas that the ACECs are within. All these could get transferred to the harvest land base. And so we're also threatened with the BLM really ramping up their cut on our local BLM forests around Roseburg. And that would be true, of course, with the Coos Bay BLM and the Roseburg BLM, as well as Medford BLM and Eugene BLM. So that's the other big thing everyone's all worried about. And there's actually a public comment right now on that up until March 31st. If you want to send in a public comment, I could send that to y'all.
I think it's the 23rd.
Oh, the 23rd. Oh, yeah, I think you're right, John. Yeah.
I've been sending what Mike Burke scoping comments. I've been sending them to people that have expressed interest in commenting on that. Any because excuse me, Mike's comments were really great and they be they're really useful points. Anybody that's interested, let us know and we can forward Mike's comments. I took them and revised them and
well, thank you, John. That's great. I'd like to see him. Is it Mike? Who is that? Mike?
What?
Mike who?
Burke.
Oh, Mike Burke. Yes. And go ahead and send me those comments too. I'd love to see them.
Yeah. Yeah. So anybody that's interested, let us know and we can forward them to you because they're really good points. A lot of times people don't really know what to say, but these are a lot of points you can just use. You don't even need to use them all. You can just use one or two of them. So.
Well, right. And that's really a great way to exercise, your right to be engaged with government, particularly on the BLM transfer side, and whatever they're doing on even the transfer land or, preparing to try to cut more forest. And right. The easier you can make it for people, the better off it is. I mean, I sign, sometimes too many petitions or letters, but the reason I'm probably engaged in the issue at all has to do with other people's work.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I think the easier you can make it for people, and I know it's an upfront lift, but it's well worth it. When I've actually paid attention and done it myself on issues.
Well, I'll send out, I mean, I've gotten some comments. People say this and say that, and so I can send some of those to you.
Yeah. And even any background information, because one of the values that, we conserve hopefully is people connecting these dots for one, and being more, able to find out information, particularly since what we do is online, to go to a source where you can find out what's happening in Douglas County on a variety of issues, or Southern Oregon. It doesn't have to be exclusively Douglas County. We can put Southern Oregon in our name.
Yes.
But it's good to have people know. I mean, I am so entrenched in homeless issues as, a main focus, that I don't have time, and probably vice versa, to pay attention to these other issues that I would like to know about and would like to be able to help in some manner. But if it starts taking up too much time, it's kind of like, oh God, no.
Yeah, well, I think there's some easy, just sign on to these comments. So I think I can send you some stuff that's not too difficult. Not too
Yeah, that's the kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I would like
Yeah,
that
that would
too,
be helpful.
please.
Okay. And how do I send it to the group? Is there a group email list that I could
Sure,
send?
we could, if you give it to Betsy, she could post it in the description so more people could also.
Okay. I'll do that. I'll do that right now.
You can always just bring up the issue of climate change and value of these trees as carbon sequestration. The fact that they're actually worth more standing than they are cut down and going to the mill. That's a good simple point. You can, you can argue. That's guys like Ernie Nemi and Chuck Willer argue those all the time.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's right.
when you
John.
were,
And, the federal land is a lot in Roseburg. It's a checkerboard every other section. So every other section is private industrial forest land, and that's gone. So we all can depend on the BLM lands for this service.
when you started to say that, because I was talking to Chuck Wooler the other day about this, right? About this idea of, doing something with that checkerboard that was brought up in the county commissioner campaign. And, I guess for the Oregon Coast Range, he has something that he had written recently, on their on their website. And that's what, he said, don't worry about this job creation, because we need it for the environment. That's the reality. We're already at that tipping point, right? I
Yeah.
think is what his argument is. And
Yeah.
we are going to have him come on SOPP and talk about it. I was actually talking to him about having an in-person event in the next couple of months. So maybe we can
Great.
plan
That'd be
that
great.
together.
Yeah. Yeah. Chuck's
Um,
great. Yeah.
yeah. And he's been doing a lot of research, into this stuff. And so it would be good to have him and anybody else who is, that of that would be interested in doing that. So thank you, Francis, for the information.
Sure.
So anybody else have anything before we go? All right. Thank you very much for being here and participating.
Thank you
Okay.
for hosting. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Have a good
All
night.
right. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Thank
There
you.
you go.
Bye.
Come on.